Alright, good morning. This is Filthy Ketchup. Welcome to my channel. Today's true crime case is very gruesome, very graphic. It deals with extreme domestic violence and extreme torture. Please be warned before we go ahead. This story is very, very distressing. Good morning to everyone who's tuned in. My name's Filthy Ketchup. This is True Crime and this is Unpacking Things. If you love true crime and you love knowledge, you're tuned into the right channel. Please like, share, subscribe, follow, all of that. Let's get into today's case. On an April afternoon in 1996, a man walks into a police station in Manchester to report that his girlfriend had accidentally drowned in the bathtub. That man was James Patterson Smith, and the girlfriend he was referring to was a 17-year-old child by the name of Kelly Ann Bates. The story that unfolds is a tale of twisted grooming, extreme torture, sexual abuse and domestic violence. James Patterson Smith was a psychopath. He was 48 years old. He was a controlling, aggressive psychopath with a long history of violence towards women. His girlfriend, Kelly Ann Bates, was just 17 years old. Kelly Ann Bates' mother said that when she first met James Patterson Smith, she had an urge to stick the bread knife into him to save her daughter. She said this urge came over her out of nowhere to stick the bread knife into him to save her little girl, to get her little girl away from him. What her mother probably experienced is a fear response. The psychopath has no emotion in their eyes. Now, when people see this, they have a fear response, and that can trigger urges such as the one I've just said. She had a flash that she needed to get her little girl away from this psychopath. That psychopath was James Patterson Smith. 17-year-old child Kelly Ann Bates had indeed drowned in the bathtub, but she had also been held prisoner for 3 weeks and undergone the most excruciating torture Britain has ever seen. Margaret and Tommy Bates noticed that when Kelly Ann was 14, she told them that she had a boyfriend, but they thought nothing of it. As any parent would, they assumed that it was a teenage crush with a young boy from school. Wanting to raise their children with a sense of independence, they gave Kelly a long leash and let her see her boyfriend as she pleased. Now, her parents were under the impression that she was seeing a boy by the name of Dave. They had no idea that it was a 48-year-old man by the name of James Patterson Smith. It wasn't long before Kelly Ann Bates started staying out overnight and her worried parents called police. When Kelly finally came home, she told them she was staying at her friend Rachel's house, but her parents had a sinking feeling that this story just wasn't true. They weren't the only ones concerned about Kelly's whereabouts. Even though they had never met him, Kelly's boyfriend Dave would occasionally call to ask where she was. What her parents didn't realise at the time was that Dave, James Patterson Smith, was already tightening his stranglehold around Kelly Ann Bates. In cases of domestic violence, this is very, very common. The perpetrator, the abuser, will start off with a very long leash, and gradually they will tighten that leash and become more and more controlling. In the case of James Patterson Smith and Kelly Ann Bates, there was also an element of grooming. Let's not forget Kelly Ann Bates was 14, he was 48, so this was actually a case of pedophilia as well. So he was using typical abusive techniques to increase his stranglehold over this naive and independent young girl. Kelly managed to keep her parents from meeting Dave for a full 2 years, so they didn't meet him until she was 16. That's when she told them she was dropping out of school and moving in with her boyfriend. Her parents were livid and called social services and the police, but because Kelly was 16, there was nothing that they could do. Now, I know that there's a legal problem when somebody's 16. There's nothing really that the police can do, but surely if a social worker, social services, if you go to someone's house and they're 16 and they're living with a 48-year-old man, surely that's a cause for concern. It might be legal, but it certainly isn't right. The case of Kellyanne Bates illustrates yet again the failure of public services to intervene in a domestic violence and or abuse situation. So because Kellyanne Bates was 16, according to UK laws, the authorities couldn't do anything. When Margaret Bates met James Patterson Smith, as I said, she had an urge to stab him, to get her little girl away from him, to do anything for him. They were shocked. Kelly told her parents that he was 32. He was not 32, he was 48, older than Kelly's father at the time. Dave's age wasn't the only thing that they were hiding from their parents. Although she was mature for her age, Kellyanne Bates was only 16 and she was young and naive. She was flattered to have an older man so interested in her and paying her attention. But what she didn't realise was that relationship was about power and control and abuse. James Patterson Smith controlled everything that Kellyanne Bates did. She had to wear what he said. She was not allowed her own money. She was not allowed to leave the house. The physical and sexual abuse became more and more and more sadistic as time went on. Her parents consistently saw Kellyanne Bates covered in bruises. She was bruised from head to foot. Once when they saw her, her entire face was black. They again reported that to police. Kellyanne Bates told the police, obviously at the behest of James, that she had been jumped by a gang of girls, and that's how she got the bruises on her face. Her demeanour gradually changed, also very common in domestic abuse. She became quiet, she became timid. She could do nothing without James Patterson Smith's permission. Every time she showed up with new injuries, her story would change. Her parents had no idea that James Patterson Smith already had a history of violence towards women. His pregnant ex-wife, he had tried to drown in the bath. One of his ex-girlfriends, he had put live electrical wires to and electrocuted her. And another of his girlfriends, he had also tried to drown in the bath. So he had a history of this behaviour. Margaret Bates could clearly see that this was abuse, and she went to the police time and time again. They told her to make an appointment with the doctor so Kellyanne Bates could go in for an exam so that they could document the abuse. But again, because Kellyanne Bates was 16, she was considered an adult and her mother was helpless. Unless she made a police statement of her own accord, that there was nothing they could do. Her mother and her parents could see that the violence was escalating when Kellyanne Bates showed up with a bite mark on her arm. It wasn't just a bite mark. A chunk of her skin had actually been gouged out of her arm. Again, she had a story, said that she'd caught it on some barbed wire or a chain link fence. In November 1995, Margaret pleaded with her to leave James Patterson Smith, but this seemed to anger Kelly. I think that this is because the reason it angered Kelly that her mother suggested leaving him was because the physical abuse and the sexual abuse had got so bad that she was actually afraid of punishment. It's not that she didn't want to leave James Smith, it's that she was too afraid to. She told her mother she would be seeing less of her, and from that time forward she cut off all contact with her parents. In March of 1996, Margaret got a Mother's Day card and a Father's Day card for her father Tommy. Both were clearly not written in Kelly's handwriting. James Patterson Smith now had complete control of their daughter and was just toying with their emotions. He was extremely sadistic. All this came to a head in the most terrible, terrible way. On April the 17th, 1996, James Patterson Smith walked into Gorton Police Department and reported that his girlfriend had drowned in the bathtub. Police arrived to a horrific bloodbath that was clearly much more than a drowning. Kellyanne Bates had been subjected to 3 weeks of the most brutal torture that not only England has ever seen, but that anyone has ever seen worldwide. In severity of abuse, only the case of Junko Furuta comes close to the torture that this young girl experienced at the hands of this controlling, domineering psychopath, this 48-year-old man who had groomed her since she was 14. The pathologist's report revealed 150 separate injuries, including having her eyes gouged out, stab marks inside the eye sockets. The eye, the orbital socket, is filled with nerves, with nerve endings. Even someone touching the inside of your eye socket would cause excruciating pain. Kelly's eyes had been gouged out, physically gouged out, and there were stab marks inside the sockets. Her mouth was mutilated, her tongue had been cut off, her ears, nose and genitalia had been cut off. Her head was partially scalped, she was boiled in water. He had actually filled a bath full of boiling water over and over again and made her sit in boiling water. She had been stabbed and cut with knives, forks, pruning shears, scissors, and both the knees, both the patella, had been kicked in. Her kneecaps were completely destroyed. Like the orbital socket, the patella of the kneecaps is filled with lots and lots of nerve endings. The pain of having your kneecaps kicked in would be absolutely indescribable. He had literally kicked her knees to matchsticks, to shreds. There was nothing left of the kneecaps, and he had stamped on the nerves of the knees. There was no place on Kellyanne Bates's body that was free from abuse. She was stabbed, she was cut, her genitalia was cut off, her eyes were gouged out, the sockets were stabbed. You know, it's absolutely indescribable what this young girl went through.